For 25 years, I believed I was building something that would outlive me. I wasn't chasing luxury. I wasn't trying to become one of those CEOs whose faces ended up on magazine covers. I just wanted to create a business that treated people honestly, delivered what it promised, and gave my employees a reason to feel proud when they told someone where they worked. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't just building a company. I was building a family, and that was exactly why losing it hurt so much. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 53 years old, and until 18 months ago, I was the co-founder of Bennett & Cole Industrial Solutions, a supply company based outside Columbus, Ohio. For 25 years, my business partner Michael Cole and I built it from nothing, literally nothing. Our first office was an old warehouse with stained concrete floors, broken fluorescent lights, and a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it twice before plugging it in. I still remember the smell of fresh paint the weekend we signed the lease. Neither of us could afford employees back then. We answered phones ourselves, packed shipments ourselves, delivered emergency orders ourselves. There were weeks when we'd work 16-hour days and still stop for burgers on the drive home because neither of us had enough energy to cook. Back then, Michael used to tell everyone the same thing. We're partners for life. I believed him. Maybe because I wanted to, maybe because I couldn't imagine dedicating my life to someone who didn't mean every word. Trust has a strange way of becoming invisible. You don't notice it while it's there. You only notice the silence after it's gone. Over the years, our little warehouse grew into 3 distribution centers across Ohio and Indiana. We employed more than 100 people. Some had been with us for over 20 years. We watched each other's children graduate high school, attended weddings, collected money when someone's spouse got sick, celebrated retirements with backyard cookouts instead of expensive hotel banquets. We weren't perfect, but we cared. That's why our clients stayed. People often assumed they worked with us because our prices were competitive. They weren't. There was always someone cheaper. The truth was much simpler. They trusted us. Trust became our most valuable product. I handled relationships. Michael handled expansion. It worked because we respected each other's strengths. Or at least I thought we did. About 3 years before everything fell apart, something changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The way cracks spread through a windshield. At first, Michael stopped asking my opinion before making decisions. Then, he started introducing new executives without discussing it. Department heads began forwarding questions to him instead of including both of us. I noticed, but I explained it away. Business was growing. Growth creates pressure. Pressure changes people. Or so I told myself. The first conversation that truly unsettled me happened during a quarterly leadership meeting. I suggested delaying a warehouse expansion until supply costs stabilized. Michael smiled. Not warmly, patiently, like someone correcting a child. "I appreciate your concern, Rachel," he said in front of everyone. "But we're thinking bigger now." We're, not we. There was a difference. I heard it. So did everyone else. Nobody looked at me. They looked down at their notebooks. That silence should have told me everything. Instead, I convinced myself I was overreacting. For months afterward, I kept focusing on the work, visiting clients, reviewing contracts, checking in with longtime employees. That's where I felt useful, where I still recognized the company we'd built. Then came the email. It arrived on a Wednesday morning. Mandatory board meeting. No agenda, no explanation, just a time, 10 o'clock, conference room A. I wasn't worried. Why would I be? Half the board members had known me for decades. I had hired 3 of them personally. When I walked into the room, something felt wrong. Nobody was talking. Coffee cups sat untouched. Folders had already been placed in front of every chair. Mine was the only one closed. Michael stood near the window, hands folded behind his back. He didn't smile. He didn't even say, "Good morning." Our attorney was there. So was an outside consultant I'd never met. That surprised me. Then Michael cleared his throat. "I'll keep this brief." His voice was calm, practiced. "As the company enters its next stage, we've decided new leadership is necessary." I frowned. "We?" He ignored the question. "The board has voted to restructure executive management." I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Not one. Finally, I opened the folder in front of me. Inside was a separation agreement, effective immediately. I read the first page twice before the words made sense. My position had been eliminated. My shares would be purchased under a valuation completed by consultants I'd never approved. I wasn't being asked. I was being informed. I looked at Michael. "What is this?" His expression barely changed. "It's business." 25 years, reduced to 2 words. I waited for someone to speak. Anyone. Linda from finance, Greg from operations, Tom, who had started as our first warehouse supervisor. Nothing. The room stayed painfully quiet. I realized then that whatever had happened, it hadn't started that morning. It had started months earlier. Maybe longer. This meeting wasn't the beginning. It was simply the day they allowed me to discover the ending they'd already written. I closed the folder carefully. "I built this company." Michael nodded once. "And no one can take that away from you." He sounded almost sympathetic. It made me angrier than if he'd shouted. "You already did." For a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt, or maybe discomfort. Then it disappeared. The consultant slid another document toward me. "If you sign today, the transition will be smoother for everyone involved." Everyone. Interesting choice of words. Not me, everyone else. I didn't sign. Instead, I stood, straightened my jacket, picked up my purse, and looked around the room one last time. "I hope," I said quietly, "none of you ever have to learn how expensive silence can become." Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me. The receptionist was crying when I walked through the lobby. She'd worked there 19 years. She stood as I approached. I'm so sorry." I smiled, not because I felt okay, because I knew if I didn't, I'd cry too. "It's all right, Susan." She hugged me anyway. By the time I reached the parking lot, word had already started spreading through the building. Employees were looking through the windows. Some waved, some simply stared. I sat inside my car without starting the engine. For the first time in 25 years, I had nowhere I needed to be. I rested both hands on the steering wheel and watched people walk in and out of the building I'd helped create. It no longer belonged to me. Legally, professionally, emotionally. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence felt more honest. That evening, I poured myself a cup of coffee instead of wine. I sat on my back porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. My phone stayed unusually quiet. A few text messages, a couple of former employees, no clients, no vendors, no partners. It made sense. People protect their own businesses. They don't choose sides. At least, that's what I believed. Then, just after 8:30, my phone rang. The caller ID made me sit upright. David Larson, CEO of Harrison Manufacturing, our largest client. A company responsible for nearly 30% of our annual revenue. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. "Rachel." His voice sounded unusually serious. "I just heard what happened." "I suppose news travels fast?" "It does." A long silence followed. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "I need to ask you one question." "What is it?" His answer would change everything. "Where are you going next?" David Larson didn't repeat the question. He didn't have to. It lingered between us like something much larger than a casual conversation. "Where are you going next?" I looked across my backyard, where the porch lights had just turned on automatically. For 25 years, I'd always had an answer when someone asked about my future. Tomorrow's meeting, next quarter's expansion, the next client visit, the next warehouse. Now, I had nothing. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. David let out a slow breath. "I was hoping you wouldn't say that." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because if you don't know yet, someone else is going to try to make that decision for you." His words caught my attention immediately. David wasn't a dramatic man. He'd built Harrison Manufacturing into one of the largest industrial equipment suppliers in the Midwest by avoiding emotional decisions. If he sounded concerned, there was a reason. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated. "I received a visit this afternoon." My stomach tightened. "Michael, about an hour after your board meeting." I closed my eyes. Of course he had. David continued. "He wanted to reassure me that nothing would change." "And?" "He spent almost 40 minutes explaining why the company would be stronger without you." That hurt more than I expected. Not because Michael had criticized me, because he'd done it before I even had time to drive home. Apparently, replacing me had been only the first item on his agenda. David laughed quietly. It wasn't amusement. It sounded more like disappointment. You know what surprised me? What? He talked about software upgrades. I waited. He talked about automation. Another pause. He talked about lower operating costs. And he never mentioned people. That sentence settled heavily in my mind, because it was true. For years, Michael and I had divided responsibilities almost naturally. He focused on numbers. I focused on relationships. Neither approach worked without the other. Or so I'd believed. David spoke again. Rachel, yes? Do you know why Harrison Manufacturing has stayed with your company for almost 20 years? I smiled sadly. I always assumed we earned it. You did. Another pause. But not because of pricing. I know. Not because of delivery times either. That surprised me. We've never been your cheapest supplier. No. The fastest. No. I laughed softly. You're not making me feel very good. His voice warmed for the first time during the conversation. You listened. I said nothing. When my purchasing manager had a stroke 12 years ago, I remember. You came to the hospital. It seemed like the right thing to do. You brought dinner for his wife. I barely remember that. I do. His voice became quieter. When COVID disrupted every shipment in the country, you called every morning. I called every client. No. He corrected me gently. You called every person. I looked down at the coffee growing cold in my hands. I'd never thought those moments mattered. Not in business. To me, they had simply been human. David continued. When my son took over operations 2 years ago, you spent an entire Saturday walking him through our supply chain. He was overwhelmed. He still talks about it. I smiled despite myself. I didn't know. You weren't trying to impress anyone. No. You were trying to help. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, David said the sentence that would stay with me forever. Rachel. You were never our favorite vendor. I blinked. You were our most trusted partner. Those words landed differently. Not because they praised me, because they explained something I'd never fully understood. Companies sign contracts, people build loyalty. Michael had spent years believing our greatest asset was our infrastructure, our warehouses, our trucks, our software, our inventory. David was reminding me of something far more valuable. Trust doesn't appear on a balance sheet, but it's often worth more than everything else combined. I appreciate you saying that, I whispered. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I know. I'm saying it because Harrison Manufacturing is reviewing every contract we have with Bennett and Cole. That made me sit upright. Already? Already. I frowned. David, I'm not asking you to interfere. I wouldn't. I'm asking you one thing. What? If you decide to start over. He paused. Call me first. The line went silent. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. Are you serious? Completely. You'd consider moving your business? I'd consider following the person I trusted. Not the company, the person. After we ended the call, I stayed on the porch long after darkness settled over the yard. The conversation replayed in my mind over and over. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't planning revenge. In fact, I still couldn't fully process everything that had happened that day. 25 years. Gone. Just like that. Yet one unexpected phone call had reminded me of something Michael had apparently forgotten. Buildings can be purchased. Equipment can be replaced. Employees can resign. Logos can change. But genuine trust, that has to be earned one conversation at a time. The following morning, my phone began ringing before 8. At first, I ignored it. I assumed it was another sympathetic message from a former employee. Instead, it was Karen Mitchell, the purchasing director for another longtime client. I heard what happened. So has everyone else, apparently. They have. Her tone became cautious. I have a question. I couldn't help smiling. It seems everyone does. She laughed. Are you retired? Retired? Please tell me you're not retiring. No, I don't even know how to retire. Good. She sounded genuinely relieved. Because if you decide to build something new. She stopped herself. I probably shouldn't say more over the phone. That was the second conversation in less than 12 hours that sounded less like sympathy and more like opportunity. By Friday afternoon, 6 longtime clients had contacted me. Not one asked about the board meeting, not one criticized Michael, not one asked for gossip. Every conversation ended almost the same way. Let us know what you decide. We'll stay in touch. Don't disappear. People like you don't stay unemployed for long. Late Friday evening, I opened my laptop for the first time since leaving the office, mostly out of habit. My inbox contained nearly 300 unread emails. Most were kind, some were heartbreaking. Warehouse supervisors, drivers, receptionists, former interns, clients I'd worked with years earlier. One message stood out. It wasn't long. It came from Thomas Reed, who had managed logistics for one of our oldest accounts. The subject line simply read, "You built the relationships." Inside, there was only one sentence. Companies don't earn loyalty, Rachel. People do. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I finally understood why Michael had been in such a hurry to remove me. He hadn't forced me out because I was no longer valuable. He'd forced me out because he knew exactly how valuable I still was. And somewhere inside Bennett and Cole's headquarters, my former partner was probably congratulating himself for winning the company. What he didn't realize was that the most valuable part of the business had quietly walked out the front door carrying nothing more than a purse, a notebook, and 25 years of trust. People often imagine betrayal as a loud event, a slammed door, an argument, someone shouting across a conference table. That wasn't how it happened. The loud part had already passed. What came afterward was much quieter. It sounded like phone calls, emails, coffee meetings, and people asking one simple question: "Can we talk?" By the beginning of the second week, I had stopped being surprised whenever my phone rang. The surprising part wasn't who was calling. It was what they wanted. Nobody asked me to complain about Michael. Nobody wanted gossip. They wanted to know whether I was finished. Or just getting started. I still didn't have an answer. Every morning, I woke up at 6 out of habit, made coffee, read the business news, then caught myself reaching for a company email account that no longer belonged to me. Old routines don't disappear overnight. They fade, one uncomfortable morning at a time. On Monday afternoon, there was a knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Standing on my porch was Kevin Morales, our operations manager. Behind him stood Lisa Chen, who had supervised customer service for almost 15 years. And behind them, 3 warehouse supervisors, a logistics coordinator, our maintenance director, 7 people, some of the same people I'd hired decades earlier. For a second, none of us spoke. Kevin finally smiled. We brought lunch. I looked down. They had pizza. It was such an ordinary gesture that I almost laughed. "You all drove out here." "With pizza?" Lisa shrugged. We figured showing up empty-handed would have been awkward. I stepped aside. "Come in." Within minutes, my dining room looked like an office break room again. Paper plates, soda cans, people talking over each other for the first time since leaving the company. The silence disappeared. Nobody mentioned the board meeting right away. Instead, we talked about families, kids going to college, someone's new puppy, Lisa's daughter getting engaged. It felt strangely comforting, like everyone needed permission to be normal before discussing what had happened. Eventually, Kevin leaned back in his chair. "So," I smiled. "So, none of us believed the story." "What story?" "That restructuring nonsense?" The room grew quiet. Lisa folded her hands. "We know why they pushed you out." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Kevin nodded. "They've been planning it for months." That wasn't entirely surprising anymore. "What makes you so sure?" He exchanged a glance with the others. "Because they started cutting you out long before they fired you." Lisa spoke next. "They told department heads to stop copying you on certain reports." Another voice joined in. "They moved vendor negotiations without telling you." "They reassigned client meetings. They changed approval procedures." One by one, pieces I hadn't seen suddenly fit together. I remembered wondering why fewer reports reached my desk, why meetings had been canceled, why Michael kept insisting everything was under control. It hadn't been my imagination. It had been preparation. Kevin reached into his backpack. I brought something. He placed a notebook on my table. It was old. Black leather. The edges were worn. I recognized it immediately. My meeting journal. He nodded. They cleaned out your office. I stared at it. I thought everything had been boxed up. It was. He smiled. But they didn't know I grabbed this first. I ran my fingers across the cover. 25 years. Client names, ideas, personal notes, birthdays, favorite restaurants, children's graduations, anniversaries. Not because I wanted to manipulate relationships, because I wanted to remember people. Michael used to tease me about it. You remember everyone's dog before you remember contract numbers? Maybe I did, looking back. I'm not sure that was a weakness. Lisa looked around the table. Rachel? Yes? We need to ask you something. There it was again, another question. I'm listening. Kevin spoke carefully. If you start another company... Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for another slice of pizza. Would you hire us? The room became perfectly still. I looked at every face around the table. Some had worked beside me for 2 decades, others for 15 years. One had started loading trucks when he was 19. Now he had gray hair. I hadn't expected this, honestly. I hadn't allowed myself to. I can't promise something that doesn't exist. Kevin nodded. We know. Lisa smiled softly. We're not asking for promises. What are you asking? Hope. That single word nearly broke me, for the first time since leaving Bennett and Cole. I felt tears threatening, not because I was sad, because I suddenly realized something. I hadn't lost everyone. Far from it. I had spent the past week assuming people stayed loyal to companies. The people sitting around my dining room table were proving something completely different. They stayed loyal to leaders who had stayed loyal to them first. One of the warehouse supervisors finally spoke. You remember when my wife had cancer? I nodded immediately. Of course. You visited every Thursday. I brought dinner. He smiled. My kids still remember that. Another voice. You came to my father's funeral. I remember. You stood in the rain for 3 hours. Lisa laughed quietly. You wrote handwritten thank you cards. Kevin shook his head. You knew every employee's birthday without looking. I looked down at the notebook lying in front of me. I had help. Kevin smiled. No. You cared. The room fell silent again. Then he leaned forward. Michael always thought the company belonged to the shareholders. He pointed toward me. We always thought it belonged to the people. Nobody argued, because nobody needed to. As everyone prepared to leave, Kevin stopped at the front door. Oh, he turned around. I almost forgot. What? He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a business card. It belonged to a commercial real estate broker. Why are you giving me this? He called yesterday. I don't understand. Someone asked him to find warehouse space. I frowned. Who? Kevin smiled. He assumed it was you? It wasn't. I know. He paused. But maybe? He glanced back at the empty pizza boxes scattered across my dining room. It should be. After everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen holding that business card. I wasn't looking at a warehouse, or an office, or a company. I was looking at a possibility, for the first time since Michael forced me out. I stopped thinking about what I'd lost, and started wondering. What if this wasn't the end of 25 years? What if it was the beginning of something better? The next morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, my phone buzzed again. The caller ID made me smile. David Larson. When I answered, he didn't bother with small talk. I hope I didn't call too early. You didn't. Good. There was excitement in his voice this time. The Bennett and Cole sales team is here. I frowned. And? They're trying very hard to convince me to renew our 5-year contract. I waited. David chuckled. They've spent 2 hours talking about pricing, software, delivery times. He paused. Then he asked the question that would change everything. They still haven't answered the only thing I wanted to know. I smiled. Which is, his answer was immediate. Why should I trust them? Now that you're gone? There are moments in business when numbers stop mattering. People like to believe every major decision comes down to spreadsheets, margins, forecasts, risk assessments. Sometimes they do, but the biggest decisions, the ones that change entire companies, Usually come down to trust. David Larson didn't call me back that afternoon. He didn't need to. His question had already told me everything. Why should I trust them? Now that you're gone, I had no idea what answer Bennett and Cole had given him. Part of me hoped they had a good one. Not because I wanted Michael to succeed, but because more than 100 employees still depended on that company. Whatever happened between Michael and me, they didn't deserve to pay the price. I tried to push the thought aside. Instead, I spent the morning organizing my home office, not because I had a business, because I needed something to do. The dining room table was still covered with notebooks, old client files, and handwritten contact lists I'd kept over the years. Looking through them felt strangely emotional. Some pages had coffee stains, others had little reminders scribbled in the margins. Ask about Susan's grandson. Congratulations on the new facility. Send flowers after surgery. None of those notes had anything to do with contracts. They had everything to do with relationships. Around 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Kevin. You busy? Not particularly. I think you should turn on the news. I frowned. The news? Local business channel. His voice sounded almost amused. What happened? You'll see. A minute later, I found the broadcast online. The anchor was standing in front of Harrison Manufacturing's headquarters. The headline at the bottom of the screen caught my attention immediately. Major supply contract under review. The reporter explained that Harrison Manufacturing had postponed signing its largest supplier renewal agreement. No names were mentioned, but I knew exactly which contract they meant. Mine. Or rather, the one that used to be mine. The interview shifted to David Larson. He stood outside the building, calm as ever. A reporter asked whether rising costs had delayed negotiations. David smiled politely. It isn't about cost. Is it about delivery? No. Technology? No. The reporter looked confused. So, what's causing the delay? David answered without hesitation. We're evaluating long-term partnerships. The interview ended there. No accusations, no drama. Just one carefully chosen sentence. But I knew David well enough to understand what he wasn't saying. He wasn't questioning the company. He was questioning its leadership. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a client. It was Greg, our former finance director. Or rather, Bennett and Cole's current finance director. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Rachel. His voice sounded exhausted. Hello, Greg. I hope I'm not bothering you. You've never bothered me. He sighed. I wish things had happened differently. So do I. Silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke again. I probably shouldn't be calling. Then why are you? Another pause. Because I owe you honesty. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. Greg lowered his voice. The board expected this to be easy. What? Replacing you. I almost laughed. They underestimated something. What? The clients. I stayed quiet. Harrison isn't the only account asking questions. My heart skipped. How many? I can't say. You already called me? He chuckled softly. Fair point. I waited. There have been meetings all week. What kind of meetings? Emergency meetings. For what reason? Clients want guarantees? About deliveries? No. Pricing? No. He sounded almost defeated. They want guarantees that the relationships won't change. I closed my eyes, because there it was again. The word, relationships. Michael had spent years believing our competitive advantage was efficiency. Meanwhile, the market had been quietly valuing something else entirely. Greg continued. I don't think Michael expected this. What did he expect? That clients would stay because the company stayed. And they're asking about you. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. I looked out the window toward the maple tree in my backyard. Its leaves were beginning to change color. Funny how seasons continue no matter what happens in your life. Greg cleared his throat. Rachel, yes? I have another reason for calling. Here it comes. What is it? He wants to meet. I laughed before I could stop myself. Michael? Yes. When? As soon as possible. I didn't answer immediately. Only a week earlier, he'd escorted me out of the company we'd built together. Now, he wanted a meeting. Interesting. What does he want? Greg hesitated. He says there's been a misunderstanding. I actually smiled. 25 years, a board vote, legal documents, a separation agreement, and somehow, now it was a misunderstanding. I see. He thinks the two of you should talk. I thanked Greg for calling and promised I'd think about it. After we hung up, I made another cup of coffee. Not because I needed caffeine, because I needed time. I walked out onto the porch and sat in the same chair where David had first called me. The air felt cooler now. Autumn was arriving. For years, whenever something difficult happened, I'd asked myself the same question. How do I fix this? That afternoon, a different question came to mind. Does everything deserve to be fixed? Some things are broken by accident. Others are broken by choice. There's an important difference. Just before sunset, another email appeared in my inbox. This one came directly from David Larson. There were only 3 lines. Rachel, the renewal meeting is officially postponed. Call me tomorrow morning. I think it's time we discuss your future. I read the message twice, then a third time. For the first time since leaving Bennett and Cole. The future no longer looked empty. It looked uncertain. And strangely, hopeful. Meanwhile, somewhere inside the office I'd once helped build, Michael Cole was trying to save the biggest contract in company history. What he still didn't understand was that contracts can be renegotiated, trust cannot. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison Manufacturing 15 minutes early. Old habits? I'd always believed that if you respected someone's time, you respected the person. David Larson met me in the lobby himself. That had never happened before. Usually one of his assistants would escort me upstairs while he finished another meeting. This time, he walked toward me with a smile that carried both warmth and concern. I'm glad you came. So am I. He led me into a conference room overlooking the production floor. Machines hummed steadily below us. Forklifts moved with practiced precision. Business was continuing as usual, at least on the surface. A pot of fresh coffee sat on the table. David poured 2 cups before either of us spoke. I've been thinking about something all week, he said. So have I. He smiled. I imagine our lists are different. Probably. For a moment, we simply looked out through the glass windows. Finally, David turned toward me. I want to tell you a story. That surprised me. I'm listening. When I bought Harrison Manufacturing 22 years ago, everyone told me the equipment was my greatest asset. I nodded. The previous owner spent millions upgrading the machinery. And was he right? David shook his head. No. What was your greatest asset? He didn't hesitate. The employees who decided to stay. That answer settled quietly between us. I learned something during my first year, he continued. Machines produce products. He looked directly at me. People produce trust. I smiled. I couldn't agree more. He leaned back in his chair. That's why I asked you here. I waited. I'm going to be completely honest. I'd expect nothing less. Our board has decided not to renew Bennett and Cole's contract. I wasn't expecting that. Not yet. I took a slow breath. Is the decision final? It is. Because of Michael? He considered the question carefully. No. Then why? Because we realized something? He folded his hands. We weren't doing business with a building. He paused. We were doing business with you. I looked down at my coffee. For 25 years, I'd worried about every late shipment, every inventory problem, every unexpected delay. I had spent thousands of hours trying to protect relationships without ever realizing how much they had grown. David slid a folder across the table. This isn't a contract. I opened it. Inside were projected purchasing volumes, annual forecasts, growth estimates. I looked up, confused. What is this? Our purchasing needs for the next 5 years. I blinked. I don't understand. We're showing you what business is available. My heart began to race. David, if you build another company? He smiled. We'd like to become your first client. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. 25 years. Gone. And yet. Here sat the largest client I'd ever managed, offering to follow me before I even had a company. I'm honored. I'm serious. I know. He leaned forward. But there are conditions. I laughed. I figured there would be. There are only 2. I'm listening. First, he raised one finger. Don't build a company that's trying to beat Bennett and Cole. I frowned. Why? Because revenge is expensive. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Build something better. He raised a second finger. And hire people who believe what you believe. Not people with the best resumes. Not the cheapest employees. Not the loudest executives. People who believed in serving clients before serving themselves. I nodded slowly. I can do that. I know. We spent the next 2 hours talking through possibilities. Warehouse space, financing, insurance, technology. The conversation felt strangely familiar, not because I had done it before, because I had, 25 years earlier. Only this time, I wasn't 28 years old with nothing but determination. This time, I had experience, relationships, a reputation, and something far more valuable than I had back then. People who wanted to build it with me. When I walked back into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was Kevin. How'd it go? I smiled. I think we need another pizza meeting. He laughed. That good? Better. Should I call everyone? I looked across the parking lot toward the American flag waving above the building. For the first time in weeks. I wasn't looking backward anymore. Yes. Tell them tonight. That evening, my dining room was full again. This time there were even more people. Warehouse supervisors, customer service representatives, drivers, purchasing specialists, people who had quietly kept Bennett and Cole running for years. After everyone had settled down, I stood near the kitchen counter holding a cup of coffee. No speech, no presentation, just honesty. I met with Harrison Manufacturing today. The room became silent. They've decided not to renew their contract. Several people exchanged surprised looks. Kevin smiled. They're coming with us, aren't they? I nodded. Yes. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted. Instead, several people simply closed their eyes, almost as if they'd been holding their breath all week. Lisa was the first to speak. So, she smiled. When do we start? I looked around the room, at faces I'd known for decades, faces that had trusted me long before this moment. I don't have an office. Nobody cared. I don't have trucks. Still, nobody cared. I don't even have a company name yet. Kevin laughed. We're aware. I couldn't help laughing too. But I can promise you something. Everyone waited. We're going to build a company where relationships matter more than titles. Heads nodded around the room. We'll make mistakes. More nods. We'll have difficult days. Silence. But we'll never forget that clients choose people before they choose businesses. This time, the room erupted into applause, not because we'd already won, because we finally believed we could. As everyone prepared to leave, my phone vibrated once more. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in over a week. Michael Cole. He had left a voicemail. I didn't play it immediately. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and watched my future business partners laughing together in my dining room. For the first time since I'd been forced out, I realized something that made me smile. Michael thought he had taken my company. What he had actually done was set me free. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of a warehouse that reminded me of where my journey had begun. It wasn't impressive. The concrete floor still had old oil stains. The fluorescent lights buzzed every now and then. The offices were small. The loading docks needed fresh paint. If someone had judged the place by appearances, they would have walked away. I smiled instead, because I wasn't looking at the building. I was looking at possibility. A simple sign hung above the entrance. Bennett Relationship Logistics. Kevin insisted the name was too long. Lisa thought it sounded old-fashioned. David Larson loved it. Anyone can move products, he'd told me. You've always moved relationships. In the end, we kept the name. Not because it was perfect, because it reflected exactly what we believed. Opening day wasn't glamorous. There were no television cameras, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no politicians giving speeches. Just 23 employees standing together inside an empty warehouse, holding coffee cups and wearing brand-new company polos. Some had left secure jobs to join me. Others had accepted lower salaries until we became profitable. Every single one had taken a risk. I looked around the room. I wish I could promise this will be easy. A few people laughed. I can't. More smiles. There will be mistakes. Heads nodded. There will be long days, everyone agreed. There will probably be moments when we wonder whether we've lost our minds. Kevin raised his hand. I already had that moment yesterday. The room burst into laughter. It broke the tension immediately. I smiled. Good, because honesty is going to be one of our policies. Then my voice became more serious. I only have one rule. Everyone became quiet. If you ever have to choose between protecting a relationship and protecting your ego. I paused. Protect the relationship. Nobody applauded. They simply nodded because they understood. That rule wasn't about business. It was about character. The first truck rolled into our loading dock just after 9 that morning. Its trailer carried raw materials for Harrison Manufacturing, our very first official shipment. Every employee stopped working for a moment just to watch. Not because it was a large order, because it represented something much bigger. Trust had arrived before profit. David Larson climbed out of his pickup truck a few minutes later. I figured I'd deliver your first purchase order in person. I shook his hand. You didn't have to do that. I know. He smiled. I wanted to. He looked around the warehouse. It's smaller than your old place. It is. Less technology. Definitely. He looked at the employees laughing while unloading the truck. But somehow, he smiled. It feels bigger. I knew exactly what he meant. Over the next 6 months, something remarkable happened. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Steadily. 1 client became 3. 3 became 7. 7 became 12. Most weren't looking for lower prices. They weren't chasing discounts. Again and again, they said almost exactly the same thing. We missed working with people who answered the phone. We wanted someone who actually remembered our business. We were tired of feeling like account numbers. Word spread faster than any advertising campaign ever could. Satisfied clients recommended us. Employees recommended us. Even competitors quietly admitted that something different was happening. We weren't growing because we had the biggest warehouse. We were growing because people trusted the people inside it. Meanwhile, Bennett and Cole was changing. I heard bits and pieces through former colleagues. High turnover. Several senior managers resigned. New executives came and went. Clients continued leaving. Not all of them, but enough. One afternoon, nearly a year after I'd been forced out, I received another unexpected phone call. It was Greg. Rachel, it's good to hear from you. I wanted you to know something. I'm listening. He hesitated. Michael resigned this morning. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of satisfaction, out of sadness. 25 years of friendship, 25 years of building something together. This wasn't how I'd ever imagined our story ending. What happened? The board blamed him for the client losses? I didn't answer. Greg continued quietly. He keeps saying the market changed. I looked across my office. Kevin was helping a new employee learn our inventory system. Lisa was laughing with a customer on the phone. The warehouse echoed with conversation. No, Greg. What? The market didn't change? He was silent. People didn't suddenly decide relationships mattered. I smiled gently. They always mattered. We had simply forgotten. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a regional business conference. The audience was filled with entrepreneurs, executives, and young business owners. Near the end of the session, a college student stood up. If you could give one piece of advice to someone starting a company today, he smiled nervously. What would it be? I looked around the room. Then I thought about the past 26 years. The warehouse, the partnership, the betrayal, the phone calls, the employees who had shown up at my house with pizza, the clients who had chosen people over logos, and finally, I answered. Never confuse your company with your reputation. The room became silent. A company can be taken from you. I paused. A building can be sold. A title can disappear. A business partner can betray you. Then I smiled. But if you've spent years treating people with honesty, respect, and kindness, no one can take those relationships away. After the applause faded, several people came over to introduce themselves. One young entrepreneur shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. I came here hoping to learn how to build a successful business. He smiled. I think I learned how to build a meaningful one instead. As I walked back to my car that evening, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Kevin. The warehouse team had gathered around a cake. Written across the frosting were 6 simple words. Our greatest asset isn't this building. Below those words, in smaller letters, was the sentence that perfectly captured everything we'd lived through. It's the people who trust us. I looked at the picture for a long moment before putting my phone away. 25 years earlier, I'd believed success meant owning a company. Life had taught me something far more valuable. Companies can be bought, buildings can be replaced, contracts can expire. But trust. Trust is the one investment that keeps paying dividends long after everything else is gone. And in the end, I realized my former business partner had never really taken my future. He had only taken the part that could be rebuilt. The part that truly mattered had been mine all along.